is trapped in melancholy. With the wood ones, a holly suggestions that obliterate to camouflage the folly. Attempted mental robbery, executed softly. The hypocrisy, this mockery, and walk the talk with me. Put the hands up to touch the Akasha, cause you know deep down there's something bigger than your wallet.
Sweet eternal balance of all that is good, true, and beautiful, friends. Welcome back to Rogue Ways and to a supercharged episode of transformational empowerment with someone who has long been a researcher into the mysterious aspects of our existence on all fronts and at all levels, a pillar of the alternative community, an intrepid explorer into all that is hidden from plain view, and a truly beautiful soul, my friend, and a huge honor to host the creator of Avatar products for health and well-being and the creator of About the Sky for exposing the aerosol injection experiments going on the global scale, Sofia Smallstorm. Thank you so much for coming back to Rogue Ways. It's really great to have you back again.
You're so nice. That was such a good and well-written introduction, and I felt like it was about me.
It's definitely about you, but I'm glad that it can make you feel good. You deserve that and much, much more than I can do, I'm sure. I just want to mention before we get started how excited many of my fans are. Last time that you came on, and again this time, I've been already getting a lot of feedback from people that they're just really excited. People love you very much. You've got a ton of supporters out there in the world, and so I'm sure that they agree with all the sentiment of that intro and more as well. And I just want to mention before we jump in that I love the support I've been getting from my fans. You guys are the best. And if you want to support me and you haven't yet, you can go to rogueways.org, my site. You can grab a tarot reading. You can buy a book right now. Sine Curve of Aeons is discounted if you want to get it from me instead of Amazon. You'll pay the same price except less tax and shipping. I'll ship it to you anywhere in the United States for $15. So you can just grab my PayPal link, paypal.me /Corey Sharman, or you can go to my site and find that link and information there. And you can also donate there, which some people have been doing instead of super chats or other things, which I think is awesome. And thank you very much for those. And best of all, you can support me on Subscribestar and become a subscriber. It's subscribestar.com/rogue-ways. And there's a bunch of content there that only subscribers get. So check that out. And finally, the podcast is back. I'll stop talking about it soon because I think most of you have realized that by now, but it is back. And so, Sophia, I always like to start with a pointless question of the episode, and usually I have something very tasty myself here to drink, but I was wondering what your favorite beverage is as sort of like a treat.
I don't know if I really have one.
None? I found this tea a long time ago, and it was Good Earth sweet and spicy, and it's like somehow tastes like it's a sugary drink, but it's not. It's just an herbal tea. There's no caffeine in it. Like there's no guilt at all. And it's this delicious beverage. And I've been drinking that. I rediscovered it recently. And it's been like this nice treat that, you know, you want something really good, but you don't want like the calories or the sugar, addiction or whatever of like a hot cocoa or something. And you can have this like lovely tea. And so I have that. And usually I have something here with me that I'm drinking on, but I just have water today.
All right, so a woman I know called Katie taught me how to make a very interesting tea. And I only made it once this winter, but I usually make it once a winter, and it's very good for cold and flu season, as they call it, which we can get into because cold and flu season is not what you think.
Yeah.
And you take 2 lemons and quarter them. You put a few slices of orange in a pot. And you put a few slices of ginger root. You can just cut it right, like not 1/4 inch, but a little bit less. Just slice it. And then you cover with water and you put in a 1/4 teaspoon of turmeric powder, or you can do the root. And you boil it, bring it to a boil, and then cover it and simmer for a good half hour to an hour. And it makes a very tart, wonderful drink, which is very concentrated. So you can drink it straight. So remember, lemon, orange. I use slices of blood orange.
Yum.
And turmeric root and ginger root.
Ooh.
And you can also put it in a jar and then use it as a little concentrate to add to other teas.
Ooh.
It would be very good with your Good Earth.
Yeah.
Just put splash a little bit into your cup. And it's excellent if you have a cold or you don't feel well, or you just need like a tart, really cool pick-me-up. So that's the recipe.
Ooh, that sounds amazing. Yeah, that reminds me of this mixture I got from. It's supposed to be all wild crafted and healthy, and I'm not sure because I didn't investigate the company, but it's a turmeric mixture with mushrooms, various mushrooms. I think there's like turkey tail and chaga and some of these that are supposed to be have a lot of health benefits for us. And somehow they made it sweet. Again, I think there might be a little bit of stevia in there, but there's no sugar. But it's almost kind of like that hot chocolate feeling that you might get too. I don't know why I'm stuck on hot chocolate right now, but because you can mix it into milk basically, and it's like a latte. And I don't drink milk, but your milk substitute would work fine too. And that has been really delicious too. And you feel good about it. You know, it's like somehow healthy, or at the very least, it's not harming you. So those are nice.
Gonna move on from our favorite drinks.
Yes, let's do it. Do you want to talk about illness, or should we move into what we had sort of planned?
No, let's go with what we planned.
Okay, that's much more exciting than I think. Excuse me. So I guess I'll just tell people that you had your newsletter that you send out to your subscribers, and this newsletter you had written in was it May or June of this last year?
Double issue, May, June.
Okay, so both. And in that issue, you had been talking about imagination. And so when we were getting ready for this show, had decided that we would use that as a sort of springboard to dive into these ideas that you had in that newsletter. And it was a very empowering and a very positive newsletter to read about. And the ideas in it are really, really neat. And one of the first ideas that sort of jumped out at me when I was reading through it was the idea that, and this has come up in a recent show too, and I can't remember which one, and maybe someone listening can remember, but this idea that you kind of have to let go of the question why, which is interesting because I am a constant asker of the question why. And I don't think that necessarily you or whoever I was talking with recently also, I don't think anybody is really meaning that you should stop asking why, but that you should stop expecting the answer to the question why and stop kind of holding on to this idea that you're going to get the question why answered as a definitive. And I like that. I like that idea because that's kind of the first step, I think, to sort of letting go of some attachments and preconceptions that we maybe have, or some roadblocks that might be in the way. And so I wonder what you think about that concept.
Well, I don't think that concept was in my newsletter, letting go of the question why or needing that question answered.
It was in that first part where it was the story that was being written about the at the very, very beginning.
Well, I began with one of John Rappaport's newsletters, which was about imagination.
Right.
And this is what got me started on imagination. John Rappaport is a very popular and very brilliant researcher himself, and I believe that he was writing about how we fail to think in super creative ways. We are trained to be linear. We are trained to assume that the world is a linear world.
Right.
Our imagination is something that only really flourishes when we're very young. And then it's basically beaten out of us by authority, our parents, school, and this whole linear three-dimensional world that we live in, this world of cause and effect, as some would call it. And imagination is what creates solutions to problems, because in the writing of this newsletter, I realized that imagination is a departure from this 3D into another dimension. And whether you want to invest in imagination coming true or not, let's just put that aside. The fact that you refuse to imagine anything, which most of us start doing once we get used to this, browbeating that we have to take all the time, we lose energy that's what I think is at the root of all this, is that some people would call it fantasizing. Imagination is pure, ridiculous fantasy and drop it right now.
Yeah.
But the fact is that energizes us. And that's what led me to realize that the world of dreaming at night is an imagination reset. Because that world in which we spend quite a bit of time, and there are a lot of people who say they don't dream or they don't remember their dreams, but I think it's safe to conclude that everybody dreams.
I agree. Yeah. There's a lot of people who don't recall it and it's kind of instantly lost when they wake up. But I think everyone, basically has to. I can't imagine not, but I can't imagine forgetting. And, you know, people, there's remedies for that. And I practice one of them, which is as soon as I wake up, I start writing down my dreams. And you find that the more you do that, you actually recall more and more most of the time, the more you get in that habit. So I think anyone can kind of practice recall if they're not good at it already.
So yeah, dreaming is a capacity that we all have. And I feel that it is a nightly reset. It is
that concept
of the rules and regulations that we otherwise operate under. And most of us are pretty stressed out by those rules, right?
Yeah.
We really don't feel the freedom to move around as we would love to in this 3D world while we're awake. But when we go to sleep, when you hit that pillow, you're moving around in all kinds of craziness. And I really think that is a very important daily reset of your capacity to imagine.
Yes. I love that concept that you brought up towards the end there, that idea that it is this reset, because I think we have sort of been trained or have come to understand that it's a reset in a way for our body, or a time for, you know, a rest so that our body can kind of reconstruct some things and heal some things and deal with whatnot, you know, and run some diagnostics or whatever, you know, as we're asleep. But I don't know that many people have ever thought of it in that way too, that it's this sort of reset for your, whatever you want to call that, your mind or your soul or whatnot. Also, like you're saying, and I love that this is sort of in your idea that where we go to sort of recharge that's been drained from us through all this sort of strictures of the modern world, or at the very least the 3D world in general. And when we're talking about it, I'm kind of picturing, you know, I love watching babies in general. I love babies, but I love that a baby will sort of, it's almost like they think they can fly and that they think they have the force, you know, they'll like reach out towards something and be confused about why they're not like instantly flying towards it. And I have this idea that maybe in their dreams, just like us, they can kind of do anything and they're sort of free like that. And then they wake up and they're still like not trained to expect 3D reality to be quite different from that. And so they're just like, why? What? And they're like reaching for something and they're like, why won't it just like come to my hands like it can, you know, in a dream? And maybe I'm making all of that up and kind of projecting it, but it just seems like, you know, they're more confused about like why those two spheres, our dreams and the physical reality, don't have more in common. So it's interesting to watch, and I love dreaming. I feel like it's one of the best parts of our lives, and I think your idea about it could also explain, you know, another level of like why we spend, like you pointed out in the newsletter, a third of our life asleep. You know, that's quite a significant amount of time. You know, and it reminds me also of the part, again, towards the beginning of the newsletter where there's that idea that you kind of want to let go of this being sort of stuck on the like laws of reality, you know, and like you said, we sort of have them like beat into us by our parents and by school and by all these processes. And then that's holding us back, you know?
Yeah, actually, there's another reason, a biological reason, that we have to spend time at rest. There are many reasons for that. One is that we navigate the world with visible light. And so when there's no visible light, we can't really do much. And that's the time that most of us go down for a few hours, let's say 8, ideally. And we hang out in another reality, which is the dream world. Now, at night, another reason for us to be lying still and not moving around much is because our central nervous system moves from sympathetic activity to parasympathetic activity. And parasympathetic nervous system activity, PNS as it's called, is rest, digest, and sleep. And that's the state in which important neurochemicals and other kinds of metabolic materials are generated within us, and our body starts doing some really deep cellular repairs and restoration. And so if you stay in an agitated state for, the whole day and night, you're not going to be able to revert to doing those really essential, very, very important, critical biological repairs. And one thing that I will throw in here is that people who use Wi-Fi, people who sleep in a room with a cordless phone or a cell phone, or people who are jam-packed in dense living situations where other people are running routers, Wi-Fi routers, or have cordless phones on the other side of apartment walls, those people are not getting into this very crucial, deep, restorative state where the PNS, parasympathetic nervous system, is running the show. So dreaming and the PNS going to work and the repairs and lying in the dark while there's no sun, et cetera, all of that kind of fits together.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I drive by this apartment building that I live next to, and I see those smart meters, and they're in, clusters, obviously, because it's a mass living situation. So there's like, I don't know, let's say 20 or 30 and like a panel on the outside. And I just think about the people who are directly on the other side of that panel. And there's at least one or two apartments that are directly, and especially what if their bed is on the other side? And I just like, oh, these poor people. I'm sure they have very little choice in the matter. But it's just, it's hard to think about, all of those layers of things that can be affecting our sleep and making it less productive than it should be. And I wonder, it'd be interesting to know what the dreams would be like of someone, before and after being exposed to that. And it's not an experiment I would want to subject someone to, but it would be interesting to know if it has an effect. And, I would venture to guess it probably does, but who knows, really?
Well, let me throw this in. First of all, I believe everybody has the capacity to register that their sleep is being disturbed. And insomnia is now an epidemic. I would venture to say worldwide, anywhere where there's been electrification of life, wireless, the addition of wireless frequencies. So we unfortunately attribute the cause of this insomnia or restlessness or, tossing and turning at night, not having an easy time falling asleep, waking up during the night. We attribute it to stress.
Yeah.
You just think, oh, I'm stressed out. Oh, I'm worried about this or that. And naturally, everybody has stress to some degree or another. Everybody is worried about something or another. But it's not necessarily the stress or the worry that keeps you tossing and turning. It's the fact that your nervous system isn't able to do that switch, that migration from sympathetic nervous system, which is alert, high alert, fight, flight, to the parasympathetic. And so people don't come to the right conclusion. And if they did, they might say, I'm not sleeping. What is the reason? When did it happen that I stopped sleeping well? And then connect it to their smart meter. Okay, so we have an opt-out here where I live in San Diego County. And as soon as it came through, I applied for the opt-out and I said, I want my smart meter taken off and I want the analog meter back.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize how quickly they would come and do it. I figured it would take 2-3 weeks because, this is bureaucracy and it's a utility company.
Right.
But a couple of days later, I was telling a friend on the phone that she should do the same. And then I said, something? I want to run and see if I have an analog meter already, because for the last 2 nights, I've been sleeping so deeply.
Wow.
And I haven't slept this well in a year. So I put her on hold and I ran downstairs and outside, and there, I couldn't believe my eyes. I had an analog meter.
Wow.
it correlated with this lovely sleep that I was getting. So I'm
Yeah.
asking 2 ways you can get into far better sleep state and also dreaming state, okay? Actually, more than 2 ways, but one is to sleep on a tilted bed.
Tilted like with your head a little higher?
Yes.
Okay.
And you can go to the website inclinedbedtherapy.com. This was the creation of a British engineer who maybe a decade ago was in Egypt looking at the pharaohs' tombs as a tourist, and he noticed that the beds were in the tombs were all inclined.
Hmm.
It was an angle of about 5 degrees, which translates to 5 to 7 inches. So if your bed is flat ordinarily, you want to picture it with the head end, meaning where you put your head, where the pillows are, up 5 to 7 inches. That doesn't mean that you jack up half the bed and you make an L out of it.
Yeah.
You want to be sleeping on a slope, just like you would on a hillside. And this guy, Andrew, I want to say Fletcher, is that his name? The engineer, it's on his website. He started researching biology and biophysics, and he discovered that animals, sheep and other kinds of herd animals, when they go to sleep outdoors, they will always sleep on a slight slope.
Wow.
The beaches slope just like that. It's a slight slope because the water washes up, right, and pulls land away. So when you tilt your bed, and you can do it with books, if you have a bed that's in an actual wooden frame, it's going to be harder because you're going to have to figure out a way to raise the whole frame. But if you have a bed with feet or legs, you can literally put a few books under the feet on the top end of the bed, leave the feet on the bottom end, right on the ground where they always are. And you can, that's how I did it. I just went to the garage and got a bunch of books I wasn't reading and had in boxes, and I could not believe the difference.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what an easy fix. That's so simple. I mean, I think most people probably have the leg kind rather than the wood kind, but it's a cheap method. That's awesome. And you definitely noticed a difference once you started sleeping that way.
Well, the first night when I woke up in the morning, I couldn't believe how warm my feet were. I felt like, and how loose my body was. I felt like I could get up and run a marathon. And normally you wake up, especially if you're older, you feel a little stiff, it'll take you a while to get going, but not when your bed is tilted. The second thing, people notice deep sleep and dreams. I mean, the vividness of dreams and the nature of the dreams. The dreams are far more colorful, better plot lines, So I would say, you want to start dreaming? Tilt your bed. It really helps so many different physiological conditions and even diseases because it prompts far better circulation. When you're lying flat, your blood pools in your midsection. When you're at this very gentle slope, so I'll repeat, no less than 5 inches, no more than 7.
I guess, sorry to interrupt you, I guess you got a little bit quiet. Is your mic still plugged in well, or maybe you got farther away from it?
No, I'm here. Can you hear that?
I can hear you, but you are like suddenly way quieter than you were.
No, I haven't changed anything.
Oh no.
I can try putting the volume up.
Let's see if that helps. I don't think I have anything on my end that I can control.
Okay, can you hear better, or is it still quiet?
Seems the same.
Well, I've done nothing.
And all my volumes are turned all the way up. Well, I guess we'll keep going. I mean, we can technically hear you. It's just quiet. Who knows why?
Well, anyway, I'll speak more forcefully. Is this better?
That's a little better. I can tell there's something that's just not connecting right, but I'm not sure what it is.
All right. I haven't done anything. I didn't even touch the computer.
I know that you don't even have to do anything and things will just change because that's the nature of the electronic madness, but we can technically hear you, so we'll just keep going.
Okay.
Okay.
So when you sleep on this tilted bed arrangement, it really helps many, many different afflictions and conditions. It has been known to help people with sleep apnea. It has
Wow.
been known to help people with migraines. It really improves injuries, back pain, all kinds of debilitation. So I would say, no matter what's wrong with you, try sleeping on this tilted bed and see whether not only do you dream more deeply and interestingly, but you might fix a lot of conditions that have otherwise been bothering you.
That's fantastic to know, and it's such a, again, like a simple thing that for people to try that could make a huge difference. And we always want, more that we can hopefully control in order to improve it, because we know there's so much that we seem to be unable to control. And so I love little things like that. And I know it's kind of a jump, but I wanted to go back to the idea that this fixation we have on sort of this linear reality and the 3D thing and the way things are supposed to work and the structure of things and all of this, this ingrained in us from school and parents and all of this stuff. But that one really obvious kind of sign of how that affects us is this study that they did on kids from kindergarten. They followed them all the way through to graduation. And, maybe you're familiar with this, maybe some of the listeners are as well. But for those who aren't, basically they gave them a test, and I think they call it the novel thinking test or the genius test or something like this. And basically it's a test that just asks them to look at a couple objects and come up with as many ways as they can to use them, period. And so, or things like that. And so it's all very open-ended, very creative sort of thinking. And in kindergarten, nearly 100% of students, of kids, tested at the level that they would call genius. It's like the highest level. It's the top of the chart. Each year after that, it goes down and goes down and goes down and goes down until the lowest levels they get are, senior year of high school and in college. And not very many adults ever score at that highest level, at that genius level. And so this ability that we have to think in novel ways and to come up with creative solutions and to sort of think outside the box and all the ways that you can describe that gets slowly killed basically out of us by the system. We started there. Like we were all there. Almost 100% of us were there at one point, and now it's gone. And the sad thing about that is what a loss. This is something deeply productive to be able to think in these creative and novel ways. And also like how horrible that this is the system and that this is the result of it. And so I wanted to get your ideas about that.
That is amazing.
It's really interesting.
Do you know the source?
I know that the source that I would use in class, because I would show this to my students and we would try and get some of it back for ourselves when I was teaching, but it came from, I just had his name and I lost it. Sir Ken Robinson. Sir Ken Robinson did a video about how the education system is flawed and how we can do better if we encourage things like open-ended and creative thinking and these things instead of sort of rote memorization and testing and all of this. And so it's a pretty neat little talk he does. It's a TED Talk. And I think if you searched for Sir Ken Robinson TED Talk or Sir Ken Robinson what's wrong with education or something like that, you would find it. And I'm sorry I don't have more of those details, but he talks all about it in some of his videos and more aspects of that problem as well.
Well, that is fascinating.
Yeah.
The fact that, each year it dwindles, it drops until we get to the point where we are good slaves. Right?
Yes.
That's what it's about, making us into slaves, into people who fall into lockstep with the way things are done. Now, yes. I think what makes the third dimension so stultifying and so restrictive is this whole environment of commerce and contracts. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not sure exactly what you mean, but I understand the words.
Okay, well, our corporatization of everything, from the point of your getting that short form birth certificate in America, I found out in India, children are born and there's a birth certificate issued in their mother tongue, mother language. And India has God knows how many languages, really a lot.
Wow.
And then, because English has become the national official language of India, it's even displacing Hindi. Another birth certificate is issued in English, and that is the corporatization of the individual, I would venture to assume. Just the way when we're born in America, first birth certificate that's issued is the long form birth certificate, and then the hospital you're born in sends that to the county. 3 days later, the short form index card size birth certificate is issued with your name in all caps, and that's when your corporate self has been generated. And it's that capital name version of yourself that appears in all your contracts, on your driver's license, on your checking account, on your credit cards. That's the name that you transact through. And it's that world of commerce and contracts that contains all these rules, all these codes, all these regulations that you have to follow. Because if you don't, you're in trouble. You can be fined. You get penalties laid on you, sued, all kinds of punishments, right? So that's the world, commerce and contracts, that we're really born into. Even though as small children, we're not expected to follow, right?
Right. Yeah, it's a pretty evil set of machinations that have been created to enslave us. And like you said, that process of killing our creativity and our imagination is to make us a better slave. And this is one of the things that's hard in listening to someone like Sir Ken Robinson, because he's very intelligent and he's definitely sussed out, what's wrong with education. But I guess for me, his shortcoming is that he sees it as like, oh, we just haven't realized this yet. Now that we realize it, we can fix it. And I see it as, well, a lot of people over time have realized it, but it's intended to be this way. They want it to produce this. And so it's not likely to change unless we create something of our own that's parallel, because the system itself is not going to be eager to release the slaves, These systems, with the birth certificate and all of these are very intentional, but I guess it's very hard for some people to see that. They start from a place of, oh, we must not just have figured this out yet. Let's figure it out. Which is sweet.
To figure out once you start looking at the fine print on all these different arrangements that you're living under, and those arrangements disallow your imagination. They enforce that you keep with certain regulations, rules, codes, terms of contract. And the world of contracting goes way back to Babylon. Hammurabi's code was all about contracts, how to contract. And we contract now in ways that are very duplicitous, because there's a lot of undisclosed material. People don't understand that they're not making contracts as equals. They're not fully informed. And especially now, you check online, I agree to the terms and conditions. Well, nobody really reads those. And the fact is that besides those overt terms and conditions that most people don't read, there are other things that occur in contracts that nobody really knows enough about, and they don't understand the real definitions under which they're making these agreements. So we have to, unfortunately, retain lawyers in order to help us disentangle ourselves from this world of commerce and contracts when we trip up in it, right?
Right.
That world of commerce and contracts is going to be turned over from lawyers to geeks, techno geeks, because everything is moving from uniform commercial code to computer code. And they call this user-friendly, open source, anyone can access it. But in order to understand it, you have to have a specific kind of training and knowledge. And all of this AI world that we're falling into with 5G, 5G is a type of recording system, data gathering, data reporting, picture painting system that works in real time. And this is what people don't understand. That is even more noxious than the health hazards that 5G brings us, because there's no latency in 5G. It's using light as a medium, right? So it's the fastest type of communication that we've ever seen. And because there's no latency, somebody somewhere or some system somewhere, and this would be an AI, artificial intelligence system, will be able to observe everything we're doing with all of the eyes, the cameras, the meter reporting, the pulsing 20,000 times a day, emitting and transmitting data. So some system will be able to observe us in real time, and our lives are going to be modeled in 3D real time in a database. And that has never happened before.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a somewhat terrifying prospect. The ubiquity of AI and the ubiquity of surveillance. And I like to try to remember that I feel strongly that that ubiquity is a fantasy, and that it's more going to be the sort of like the panopticon concept, where it's more like you are meant to feel as though it is there, and there's still going to be places where you're not being actively observed and where you can escape some of that surveillance. And I only bring this up just to remind people that any technology they ever kind of roll out, it always has flaws. It never works perfectly. And so it's scary and it's wrong and it's bad for us. But at the same time, there's going to be ways of avoiding and getting around it technically, at the very least, if not kind of more common even, because again, I think they rely on that idea that you're always being watched to sort of control you, and in fact, you're never always being watched. And this will be the closest to always being watched that we could get. But I just think there's always going to be holes in it. There's always going to be some failure in it. They're not actually omniscient or omnipotent, even though they wish they were, I think. So I like to remember that for myself, just because otherwise I get overwhelmed by it. And it feels like, well, what's the point of resisting then if this is going to be how it is? But yeah, I like to keep a little hope alive.
I've noticed on TV that all these HGTV shows are very, very uniform in that everyone who's involved in these shows, I'm not talking about the people that bust up houses and do all the remodeling. I'm talking about the buyers, the clients. But the whole thing on HGTV for years has been that you are supposed to ooh and ah over open floor plans, tons of light, oh, I love the big windows, oh, stainless steel appliances, oh, granite countertops, I love the light, I love the flow, let's knock out this wall, let's put, something here or take something out here. So it's never, actually, I was wrong when I said let's put something here, but let's put support beams here so that we can have open spaces. So these open spaces are for the surveillance. Knocking out all of the little rooms we used to live in, and I thought they were into energy conservation, but when I started realizing that on TV they want these flowing open floor plans, that's not about conserving energy. It's going to take all kinds of money to heat living spaces like that, right? So what they're really after is surveillance. They want all your little TV, big, huge TVs and cameras and all your, computer monitors. They want everything to be able to hear and see. So I say, first thing you can do is live in small rooms.
Yeah.
Don't go for this, knocking out walls and moving into these luscious, expansive pads where everything is reflective surfaces,
Yeah.
lots of big windows with light, because this is how cameras work, right?
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point. I remember we talked a little bit about this last time you were on, but I don't think I thought about, or you brought up the idea that the part of that open concept allows all of your screens and little gadgets to sort of gather more information. And I guess I'm even more grateful than I was before that I just moved into this house with very small, it's a very old school house. It's very small rooms and a lot of them clustered together, and there's nothing open concept about it at all. And part of it feels, now that we've been sort of conditioned to like this open concept sort of thing, sometimes it feels like a little bit cloistered and, claustrophobic. But the more I've settled in, the more I'm like, this is actually really comfortable. I mean, each room really is its own unique space and its own unique vibe. And then obviously for what we're talking about now, it's maybe going to be better for protecting my privacy and whatnot. And I also think that this house still has lead paint, because we've noticed the signal from room to room changes dramatically. And so I kind of hope that it does, because I think that, protects us from some of the EMF coming from outside, at least, or between rooms somewhat. So I kind of like that. I kind of like going back to that. And I'd go back even further and sort of live in like a cave or a mud hut if I could figure that out. But maybe someday.
People, just like cats, do you notice how cats like to go into boxes and get into drawers and things? Animals like living in small spaces. They like to nest and cuddle down small spaces. And there's nothing wrong with human beings feeling contained and secure in the same kind of situation. And these open spaces make you feel very, very vulnerable, just as you say. And I would suggest that maybe the material in your walls in that old-fashioned house is plaster. Plaster tends to be dense. And I know a woman who lives in a very old house on the East Coast. I think it's like 100 years old.
Wow.
And she cannot get Wi-Fi to go outside her office. Because the walls, not only are they plaster, but they have this thick horsehair insulation. And I don't know really, I haven't puzzled out what the horsehair is doing, but the denser the building material, for instance, a red brick house shields against RF very effectively compared to a wooden house.
Okay. Because, I had thought that organic material.
Also very good. No, it's all about what the level of rock or silica in the material.
Interesting. It's like an insulator.
Well, it's not that it's an insulator, it's that it scrambles signal.
Ooh, even better. Is it crystalline?
Yeah. So mountains and hills and land masses will block signal, but it's really because there's so much crystalline material in them and metallic material in the rock that it grabs that signal, and the signal doesn't really get through.
I'm just going to pause really quick and ask people, this is the farthest away I can make my microphone from me. Is our sound balance a little bit better? I literally can't change Sophia's levels and my levels. They're both on just one control. So if I turn one down, we both go down. If I turn one up, we both go up. But I've moved the microphone as far away from me as I can get. Is that like a little bit better? I don't know how soon they're going to respond to me, so we'll just keep talking. But unless you have more to say on that sort of line of thinking, I want to try to bring it back to the imagination thread that we have. Because obviously these EMF signals and other aspects of our modern lives are making our sleep worse. And so it's harder, I think, for us to sort of access and play and, I guess, reset, like you were saying, our imaginative powers in that space. And obviously education is, dumbing our imagination down like every year worse and worse. And so if you stay in that, you're at this huge disadvantage where our imaginations are sort of atrophied. And I don't think we got to it in the newsletter so much. No, yeah, we did. Let's talk about some of the ways that you had outlined that would maybe help us improve and bring those back for us? How can we bring back our imagination?
Well, first of all, you have to use it. You have to go into a kind of very free place where you have to think of solutions, and then I really believe that we can't solve things in a linear way. So something dawned on me while I was writing this newsletter. And there's a state, by the way, before you fall asleep. It's called the pre-sleep state. It's different from dreaming.
Yeah.
It's like a pre-dream. Have you had this?
Yes. I didn't know that other people did for a long time, and I thought I was just kind of crazy. And so like I didn't talk about it, but now I know it's something that a lot of people experience, and that makes me feel a lot better.
Yeah, it's technically called hypnagogia or hypnagogia.
Yeah.
And it's that sometimes it's only a few minutes, 10 minutes or so before you go to sleep, and you start, it's almost like you're beginning to dream, but it's more choppy. Sometimes people just see flashes of light or colors, but it can turn into little scenarios, skits, people talking, you hear voices, just having conversation. I used to think it was my mother's voice because a lot of time it was a female voice that sounded like my mother, but they're a kind of hallucination, and they really can also be very startling. I thought it was the feds targeting me with some kind of beam or wave, but sometimes it'll be explosive sounds, like a clap of thunder, or it sounds like a gunshot or something,
Yeah.
Bags. Sometimes people hear their name being called, doorbell ringing, snatches of speech. But all of this is part of this hypnagogic state. And it can also be a state that gives you tremendous insight into something that's happening in your life. And there are people, on the order of Beethoven and Mozart and all these highly talented genius types in our world that have had kind of like revelations, downloads, you could call them, in this pre-sleep state. And I have had them as well. I have had amazing things that seem to be said to me, and then I say to myself, oh my God, this pertains to blah blah blah, I've got to write it down. And as soon as you wake up fully to write this thing down, that state goes away.
Yeah.
But I actually trained myself to almost at will go into that state, and then if I have a nice download, I can revive myself, record it, and then go back into the state repeatedly in one night.
Wow.
So what about you?
That's very impressive. I think it was interesting to me when you were talking about this, because all of the things that you described are things that I've also experienced in that state. And, when people talk about things like having a vision or having a download, like you just said, or, this was given to me from spirit or whatever, I feel like it's the same thing. And so I think no matter how you talk about it or look at it, whether you look at it very materialistically or very spiritually, I think it's the same thing. And I think you're just accessing that, like you're saying, like this more imaginative state of mind that's like almost in the dream world, but it's not quite. And you're just in it enough to sort of like still consciously take it in on purpose, almost like you said. And I've definitely had the loud sounds. I've had my name said. I've had snippets of sort of conversation, almost like I'm overhearing someone talking to someone else. I've had like something that feels like it's directly speaking to me, as though I'm, going to respond perhaps. And all of those, and sometimes, often, I'd say like you, those are things that end up being very profound for my life and for whatever I'm going through at the time. And sometimes it'll even be health advice, like, hey, you should like start doing this or stop doing that. And I'm like, oh, and then I do. And like suddenly some problem I had like disappears. And so it's really fascinating to me that other people also have that experience. And that's really cool. I don't have the ability to go in multiple times a night, or at least I've never tried. But I also wanted to point out that when I meditate, it's almost the same experience. It's a very different experience, but it's the same feeling that something is sort of coming to you from somewhere else sometimes, or like this download or this, vision or this knowledge is given or whatever that is. And so it's interesting that the two seem similar and connected to me.
Yeah, and I'm tending to believe now that our problems and insights that we receive in order to solve problems really don't come from 3D. They come from a higher dimension.
Yeah.
And that to me is very, very interesting, because all this stuff that goes on in dreams and in the pre-dream state, because it's so unlike what happens in our linear 3D world, it seems like it's really
Excuse me.
in a different dimension, and we're accessing another dimension that way. And that's a very healthy thing, I feel.
I agree. And I think some people might call that the Akashic record, and that you're accessing that. Excuse me. And I think that's also another similar idea that it's basically the same thing, but we're just kind of looking at it from different angles. Or, excuse me, my throat got suddenly very dry and scratchy.
Well, I can segue into a body of work I found on the internet recently, and I put a bunch of it on my website, on my blog, which is sofiasmallstorm.com. Now, I have to say, I'm not blogging on a regular basis because I'm deep in this new kind of investigation, and I'm making all kinds of records and writing about it. But there's a guy that was in the movie What Did Grief Do With Me? And he was the favorite interview of that movie that was decided by most audiences. And his name was Dr. Joe Dispenza. And
Oh.
actor practicing here in San Diego. And he was in a triathlon. I think he was about 26 at the time. And he got hit by a truck. I don't really know how, because I thought they closed the roads to traffic when they have a triathlon. But
Yeah.
something happened and he was hit by a truck. He had really, really bad injuries. There was multiple spinal fractures and all kinds of other stuff. He was told he was never going to walk again. He would be in a wheelchair and had to undergo some really horrific, complicated back surgery in order just to deal with the pain he was going to be facing. And he didn't want to believe any of this. He didn't want any of it. So he decided he was going to refuse the orthodox path that they were trying to put him on. And he said, now, I think there's a very high intelligence consciousness running my body. I'm conscious. I have to communicate with that consciousness. And he went into all kinds of different experiments, meditation type experiments, and he struggled with this for many weeks. And then, you know what, 10 weeks later, he was walking.
Wow.
He was wheelchair bound. And then a few weeks after that, he was riding a bike, and sold his practice, sold his house, traveled the world in search of other people who had had what is called in medicalese spontaneous remission. So he found these people, and he has created a body of work. He does all kinds of retreats and seminars, and he's written books. And I started listening to his stuff, and I realized that he is very, very right on. When you start following Joe Dispenza, just go to YouTube, type it in Dispenza. I have put on my 2019 blog page, I'm now on my 2020 blog page, but I'm not blogging on. I'm about to put up some more stuff. But the Joe Dispenza material on my 2019 blog, SofiaSmallstorm.com, go to 2019. If you start at the bottom, in the red title, if you scroll down, you'll see the first thing that I put up. It's called Joe Dispenza Rewire Your Brain. Really rewire your brain. And there's testimonials. I put 5 or 6 things up, and you're going to be blown away by this. And so Joe Dispenza explains to us that we cannot solve problems in 3D. We have to go into the future to solve the problems. And this sounds crazy, but when you really try to understand what he's saying, you will be amazed at how much sense it
Yes, I have. I guess the first time I heard of him must have been from What the Bleep Do We Know, because I definitely loved that film way back then, but I have forgotten a lot of it. But I interviewed one of his. I guess I don't know how to describe her. She's worked with him a bit. Her name is Burns Bedard, and she came on Rogue Ways to talk about her experience, and she also had this sort of transcendent amazing healing from his tutelage and her following of his method. And so she talked about that and what it's been like to work with him and kind of her life journey, and it was really inspiring. And you hear about these types of things too, even outside of Joe's specific method, but that people, with the power of their mind, basically can kind of cure themselves and heal themselves from these things that otherwise we would think would be impossible. And then you can also relate that then to this placebo effect, where people, the coolest story that I like to use is this woman was put into whatever radiation machine people do when they have cancer, and she did all her treatments and whatnot, went through, and her cancer went into remission and she was fine and she was better, and then they found out that machine had not been working for like over a year or something, and so all of her treatments had been just nothing, but because she believed that this was curing her, it did. I mean, that's what you could take from that, at least. And we know that the placebo effect works, and often works better than many medications. And so it's interesting, that there's many ways of sort of attacking this, but that they all rely on what you think and what you believe is happening, and so it requires your participation and your belief, and it requires your imagination, like we're talking about. Otherwise, you can imagine it wouldn't work at all. If someone didn't believe in it, if you asked an atheist to pray to God, that's probably not going to work out for them. But if you could teach them this method, then that probably would work better for them. So there has to be some aspect of it where you believe it, but the key of it is your imagination in the end.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm just looking for my notes that I took on Joe Dispenza, but I can't find them. I will say this, that it's not just your imagination. He points out that a lot of our super healing goes on because of our pineal gland. This gland is capable, upon, firing, capable of generating enormous quantities of neurochemicals, neurotransmitters, signaling materials that then create a rapid healing response in a certain area of the body that's ailing. So I really believe that in past times we could heal very spontaneously, very quickly. We would have very rapid recoveries because we would get tired of being sick. We didn't really have the luxury of being sick. We were required in our communities. We had specific roles and people depended on us. And so we would want to get well quickly. And the pineal gland would fire, and these neurochemicals and these signaling materials would go off, and we would have rapid recoveries. We don't have those today because we are under this assault from so many different sides. Our pineal gland is suffering from EMFs, radio frequencies. It's suffering from chemical intrusions into our body. I've heard that fluoride calcifies the pineal gland. The pineal gland is definitely not working at full, it's not firing on all cylinders. And it is a piezoelectric part of the body, which means that it releases voltage or frequencies, and those signals go traveling off to far corners of ourselves and generate the healing. So this pineal gland is what is activated in the types of meditation exercises that Dispenza teaches. And we need to wake up that pineal gland, in my opinion.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And it's interesting that there's a lot of the, trash that we're sort of taking into us that tends to, as far as we understand, what do they call it, calcify, or, however you want to think about it, damage or occlude the pineal gland's function in our body, especially fluoride is said to do that. And so, if we want to sort of clean our pineal gland up and make it more accessible and more functional in our lives and more able to be used in these ways, then we first have to stop taking in the poisons that, as far as we can, as much as we can do at least, that are kind of negatively affecting that gland. And so, I use a Berkey pillow. Sorry, I was reading the chat really quickly. A Berkey filter, and you buy the extra attachment that takes out the fluoride, and it does a pretty good job of that based on whatever tests I've seen other people do. I've never done it, but it supposedly does. And then I also think it's really cool that we found this shower filter, and we put the shower filter on, and now the water that because you don't necessarily think about it, but it's like you're absorbing water through your skin. It's a porous membrane and porous organ or whatever, and things are coming through that. So if that water is coming through, but you're also breathing in the mist and taking some of that in, so you're getting fluoride from that as well, and that's a pretty big dose too. So, and there's debate about whether or not you should use fluoride on your teeth. I'd say do whatever you want, just don't swallow it. But there's a lot of ways you can at least cut that out and help your pineal gland in that way. And then I personally feel, and I could be wrong, that practices like meditation, or probably like what you're talking about with a hypnagogic, experience where you're doing that multiple times and trying to access that intentionally and consciously. I think these types of things also, maybe it's almost like it's a muscle, right? You're like using it, and so it's coming back to life sort of. And so I think those are a couple things that maybe we could do that could help in that way, because I think there is a direct attack, intentionally so, on that specific gland for that reason, to keep us, again, without access to this level of ourselves.
Yeah, sorry, I'm still rummaging around for my notes. I know they're around here, but it's dark and I can't really find them easily. But I have so many delicious notes that I took on this suspended material, but they're out of reach unless I make a lot of noise and rustle a lot of pages.
Oh, that's okay. We can go anywhere we want with it, but I do think that that's a cool resource that people have where they can go find more from Joe Dispenza and maybe learn some of those methods. But yeah, I think it's interesting too that this idea that was in your newsletter and that kind of correlates with everything that we're talking about, that that we have this sort of subconscious program running. And you and I were talking about this the other day as well, where I was kind of saying like, oh yeah, why do I forget that I have this power, that I can, kind of create my life as I want to, and use these like visualization and my imagination and my pineal gland to sort of like direct how things should go and what should come next. And I forget. And you were like, well, we're kind of programmed to, we're trained to forget. And it's true. And it's like our subconscious sort of like runs things. And I think this is another aspect of the story. And I think it's another purpose of things like meditation, is that you try to get to the point where you're not just on sort of like autopilot and subconscious programming. And the more intentional, basically the more awareness that you can bring and the more observation you can bring to each moment and being in the moment, then the less your subconscious is going to run your programs for you, basically, and sort of, sideline you into these more destructive and less aware areas of life. And, I think the way that maybe you put it in the newsletter was that imagination, creates, and that the subconscious or the id, it doesn't know how to create, it just recreates. It just sort of redoes the same old stuff.
I don't know if it's the subconscious. I mean, I think the subconscious is a good thing. The subconscious is free. It's the conscious mind that's not so free, right?
Right.
But again, it's up to you. The question is, do you want something different? Are you willing to accept really wild developments? Because when you free yourself up, you're going to get some wild developments. And there are people who don't like that. It unsettles them.
That's a good point.
Put one foot in front of another and do everything the hard way, right? They don't want to do it the imaginative way because it's too unsettling. It throws all their training aside.
Right.
And that there are people who can't function once that happens. So you have to make the choice. How do you want your life to play out? Do you want it to play out in a linear way, or do you want to be constantly surprised and have an adventure?
Yeah. I love that. And I think, that's part of why that can feel so scary to people is because we're in this sort of place where we're on that autopilot and programming and we know what to expect. And it's a lot more comfortable to know what to expect. And it's the same reason why people who have been abused will go back to those same types of relationships over and over again. And you're like, why? And it's like, because that's what they're used to, and we are used to what we're used to. It's more comfortable. But like you said, I mean, you're going to get the same old thing if you keep going the same old way. But, you can have some pretty wild experiences and adventures, or just something very different, and hopefully better, if you can kind of let that go and kind of let go of your previous experiences and your training and programming and maybe imagine like how else it could be, or at least be open to it being very different. And I don't know if this is the best time for it, but I just really like that story that you told about the wire object that you had envisioned. Do you want to share that story?
Yeah, it's such a dumb story.
It's pretty cool though.
Well, let me look in my newsletter to make sure that I tell it right, okay? So, all right, I had this crappy, cruddy colander. It was a fine mesh colander, and it originally was purple, and I had it for so many years, and it was on my kitchen table, and I was putting like avocados and bananas and lemons into ripen, and it was getting rusty, and it was awful looking, and I decided I can't use this thing anymore. I have to toss it, and I need something in its place. So what I really wanted was something I had never seen before. I wanted something that was, about like 6 inches high and maybe 8 inches wide, a wire thing, black wire, and I wanted it to have big gaps in it, like a wire basket, and I thought I could put lemons in that. Where do I get one of these? I have never seen one in a store, never seen anything like this online. And so I just thought, okay, well, I'm going to come across one somehow, maybe at a thrift store or something. And I started on another household kind of a task thing, which was to clean up my cactus experiments outside. And I had all these little pots with bits of cactus different kinds that I was growing, and some of them were dead, and I wanted to combine them. Sometimes when you combine cactus plants, that you get these beautiful, growths that all look fantastic together.
Yeah.
So I had bought a cactus planter at Home Depot maybe 10 years ago, and it was full of this straw material, and it had cactus in it, and half the cactus were dead. I just decided, get rid of this, get rid of everything that's growing in it or not growing in it, pull out this straw, and grow it out. So I don't know why I didn't throw the whole thing out, but I did pull the straw out, and then I saw that there was this round black wire form that was 8 inches in diameter, 6 inches high. Perfect condition. It was exactly what I saw in my mind for my kitchen table. And it became my fruit basket, and it had been outside for 10 years.
Wow.
A speck of rust It was in pristine condition, and I could not believe it.
Wow. It's things like that where it's like, and you say like, oh, it's a stupid little story, but it's actually this really cool story because, like you said, like you visualize this thing, and within days it's here right before you. It was there all the time, really, but like, there it is. Suddenly it shows up, and I have a similar sort of stupid story that I was living in a new place and I was on the beach, and it's actually one of the best, the places where I got the best sleep of my life because I could hear the beach, and there's like literally no cell signal out there, and there was no Wi-Fi, and it was just really, really nice. You could really sink into that. It was beautiful. But anyway, one of my neighbors who I was just meeting, we were having dinner, and she told me, this beach is magic. And I was like, oh, okay, like, sure. I'm like, how's it magic? And she's like, well, anything you need, you just say you need it, and the beach will give it to you. And I was like, okay, cool. Like, I need a pair of scissors. And she's like, do you? And I was like, yeah. And she's like, okay, the beach will give it to you the next time you take a walk on it. And I was like, whatever. I went out for a walk, but I did picture it, in my head. I was like picturing like, what would it be like to find a pair of scissors on a beach? And it's one of these rocky beaches, where it's like mostly larger sort of stones. And then as you get closer to the water, it's the smaller stones. And I went for the walk, and it was the next walk I took, and there was a pair of scissors. And there's like no one on this beach. It's this very remote location. There's just a few houses and then just miles of nothing. And so I like, when I walked up and I see it, I'm like, looking around suddenly, I'm like, did she come out here and put these scissors here? But she's like 80 years old, and it was far from her house, and I highly doubt she did. And I don't think there was like some trick that they were putting up. I just think that I found a pair of scissors on the beach, but it's like the chances of that are pretty low. And I think it's the same type of thing where like I think that that's literally the belief in it, maybe because a lot of people feel that way about this beach. Maybe it has like more of a chance to work for us in this way. I don't really pretend to know that, but I definitely think that act of sort of like imagining it and then being open to it, even though I didn't really think it would happen, is part of it, and just interesting. I wish I still had those pair of scissors, but they're long gone somewhere in life.
All right, well, what were the scissors like?
So that was the interesting part, was they looked exactly in real life like they did when I had first imagined it. And it was just like the regular pair of, I don't know, almost like, I'm really bad with spatial relationships. So let's just say like the foot-long regular scissors that you kind of get with the plastic handle that was like blue. But even that, it's like scissor handles come in all kinds of colors. There's like orange, black, purple, blue, red. There's all of them. And it was like the same color blue I had imagined. Like it really looked like it had just come straight from my mind onto the beach. And they're in perfect condition. There was no seaweed, dirt. Like they was just like sitting there. It doesn't make any sense.
It did come straight from your mind.
That's what I'm left to believe, right?
You have to do these kinds of experiments. You really have to. You have to get a kick out of them.
And it is, I think like you were saying earlier, like some people are afraid of, the unknown, or like a change to their routine or a change to their understanding of how reality works. And so I think that same experience that you had of like finding the exact wire, structure that you had imagined, or of me finding the scissors, I think that would like freak some people out. And I think that's part of why it maybe doesn't happen for them, because some part of them has kind of closed that off in that way by being not open to it. I think something about that emotion of like joy or playfulness about it is part of what maybe allows it to work in this way. I'm not sure.
I'm still looking for my notes. I can't stand it.
I'm sorry.
No, it's not you shouldn't be sorry. There they are. They have disappeared. I'm not getting alarmed because there's something going on. But usually these notes, I know exactly where they are, and they're right here. And now they're not. They just walked off.
I think there's some aspect of this show that was destined to be messed with.
Well,
We got this.
Good, but the notes have literally got legs and walked off. And they shouldn't. There's these other notes that I have that haven't walked off. That's right now. I want these notes, all right? So, no, these aren't them.
See, now we're all imagining you finding the notes, so maybe it'll help.
I feel like you should put me on hold and talk for 3 minutes and let me just go through these papers to see where these notes have gone.
Okay, you do that, and I will tell another story of miraculous manifestation.
Okay.
Okay. This was, I'm really bad with time too, so we'll just say 3 years ago. Some of the people listening know this story, and so this will be a repeat, but I was practicing powers of manifestation, and I knew that soon I would be selling the house I was in, and that I would be looking for another house to buy. And so I sat down, and I'd never practiced this method of manifestation, but I wanted to try it. So I did the vision board, and I don't know if I did exactly vision board because I don't really actually know if there is like a specific type, but my understanding of it was that you draw or artistically represent somehow the vision of the future that you have, and you kind of infuse that with the joy and the energy that you would feel when you got this achievement later in the future, and that sort of thing. So I drew a picture of the house I wanted, and it was a blue house, and it had a red door, and it had a little porch, and I put columns on it. There were some columns. It had 2 parts even. It had like one roof, and then behind it like a bigger roof. So there was sort of 2 sections of it, and it was a 2-story house, and it had 2 windows on the front, and I put a fruit tree outside. I actually put more than 1 fruit tree, but 2 fruit trees outside, and then I just had a picture, or put me and my partner at the time sitting outside enjoying and like reading under the tree. And there was a black dog also that I put on the porch because I always want a dog, and I never get one because I always decide that I don't really want that level of responsibility in my life, but I always want one. So I put the black dog there too, thinking maybe we'll get a dog. So however many months go by, and every once in a while I'd come back to it and look at it and imagine it, and then we went to go finally buy the house, and we were looking at houses, and there's very specific date range and all these sort of specifications I had for what house I wanted, and so I would always only have a few houses at a time for us to look at in the region that we were looking in, and none of them were quite right. It was like, well, we could get this. I guess it's a good deal, and it technically is what we want, but it's not quite, it just doesn't feel great. And so I was kind of coming down to like, well, we just need to get a house at some point. Like, we can't just look forever. And so I was like, well, I guess we'll get this one house that's like the closest to my vision. It's not really close at all, but whatever. So we thought, well, let's go eat. And this is a town I had never spent much time in, and he hadn't spent any time at all. We're like, we'll go eat, and we'll think about it just make sure that we're certain, and then we'll call and tell our real estate agent we want to put an offer in. And so we were driving actually to a totally different part of town to go to this other restaurant we had in mind. And on the way, I just happened to see this sign for this restaurant, and I had never been to this restaurant. I'd never really been in this part of town. But I said, oh, I remember like 2 years ago, my mom mentioned this restaurant. She said it's so good, and we should go there instead. That sounds really awesome. So we turned around, and we went and we parked, and we went there. And again, I wouldn't have even known to have possibly eaten there, except I just saw the sign and remembered this conversation from 2 years earlier. So we stop, we get out, we're eating. We first walk by this really cute house. I'm like, wow, that house is so cute. The garden is amazing. And there's this huge fruit tree in the backyard. And like, what a cool house. And this little black dog runs up and sticks his head out of this like hole that's built in the fence for him and says hi. And I'm like, oh, what a cute dog. And so we like interact with this house a little bit. We go sit down at the restaurant, which is directly across the street from the house. We're sitting there, we're eating, we're like debating. We're like, we really don't love this house though, but like we need to like get a house soon. And what are we going to do? And we're like, well, let's just look one more time and see if anything we missed, on the house app. I think it was Zillow or one of these. And so we're eating, we're looking at the app, and there is a house we missed. And it's actually like fits all of our criteria. And I'm like, how did we miss this house? This is crazy. It's in our price range. It's like all the things we want. And so we like click on, we zoom, we're like, where is it? And we're zooming into the map to see where it is. And it's directly across the street. And it's the house that we had just walked by. And I was like, what are the chances that this house is for sale? And then we just happened to stop here. And then it's just, this is like really weird. And then the woman in the house came outside and she was watering her garden and we had just paid and we were like getting ready to leave. And I'm like, oh my God, let's go ask her if we can like look at her house. So we went over, we asked her, she's like, oh, sure, come in, which is you're not really supposed to do, but we did. And it's the perfect house and it's awesome. And we're like, wow. And she's telling us, all the things about the house, which is pretty cool. You don't usually get the owner's input on, sort of the things that might be kind of wrong and what to watch for and whatever sort of specific things about the house. And she shows us the backyard, which we couldn't see from the street because it's, got a privacy fence and the yard is amazing. And I'm like, I love this house. We're going to buy this house, which you're not supposed to do either. You're not supposed to tell the person you're buying it from how much you love it, but she's like, it's been on the market for a couple months and we need to go. And I was like, well, we're your people. We're going to buy it. So we put an offer in that night. We got the house, but it took me maybe like a month to realize that when I look at the house from the front as a whole, it's exactly like what I drew. It's a blue house. It has a red door, has the windows. It's 2 stories. It has the, front kind of part and like a bigger, like another roof behind it. Like, all of it except the columns. It has a giant fruit tree and it had the black dog. And that is my story about the house that I bought. It was pretty amazing.
Well, I'm going to say that you went into the future.
Yeah.
That's where you drew the house. And then you went back into the present. And then the house came to you.
Yes, that's what it felt like. I was just like sucked towards that house because it was a total accident. We even drove by that and that we looked one more time and that we hadn't seen it before, and all of these things were pretty random and wacky. And then, like I said, again, to realize that it looked exactly the same, I was like, I must have gone into the future because you can't, well, I don't know actually, but I feel that I can't literally create a house in 3D reality from my mind, and the whole backstory of it, like the people who live there and all of that would have had to be there. So that'd be very complicated, but.
Well, one of the things Dispenza says, and I did find my notes, by the way. I knew that if I was off the hook, I would find them. And they weren't here, they were over there. I had just moved them, but I couldn't figure out where I moved them, and I didn't want to make too much noise. But as soon as I was off, no pressure, I found them immediately. Okay.
No stress, yeah.
Yes. And this is true, and really think about this. Everything you know about yourself, the way you define yourself, your identity, what does it come from? It comes from your memories of things you've been through. You have crafted and forged your identity out of your memories up till now. But you have parts of your identity that haven't been present or realized in memories, right?
Right.
This is my take on Dispenza.
Okay.
And so those parts of you are in the future. They haven't happened yet. So you are really this immense thing of part of you is possibilities and part of you is a has-been, right?
Right.
So the tendency in our daily lives is to operate in the has-been part of us.
Yes.
You wake up and you think about the stuff you have to do, which is based on the stuff that you have already done. It's your job, or you got to buy this, or restock that, or take the dog to the vet, or, whatever. Worry about how are you going to fix the toilet, or do you have money for such and such? This is all stuff that you're dragging out of the past. And if it's occupying your mind and causing anxiety, then it's your negative past. And one of the things he says is that we define ourselves from our past, from our own record of our past. And it's important to remember that every second, the present is tumbling into the future. Mm-hmm. And so if you fill up your present with stuff from your past and you worry about it, that's tumbling right into your future. So how do you stop that? He wants you to, you've got to cut your past off. Just drop it all. And we unconsciously revive it all the time.
Yeah.
I'm going to point something out that a very wise man taught me, and it makes so much sense. So, how do most people live? They think about the past and they reflect on the past with resentment and blame. These things happened and they shouldn't have happened, and it was because of so and so, and if only I had done such and such. So it's a mixture of blame, resentment, and guilt about what you didn't do, right?
Right.
And so the way that most people experience the present is with irritation and anger and annoyance, because things aren't going right. So the present is, it's angst. It's not, doesn't feel comfortable. It's not, wow, I'm amazed. This is fantastic, right?
Yeah.
And the future is dread and anxiety and fear. Okay? So that's one side of the fence. What's another way to look at the past? Instead of resentment, blame, and guilt, how about gratitude and appreciation
Yeah.
for what happened? Even if you have to say, it's done, it's not going to happen,
Right.
it's not happening now, right?
Yes.
If that's where you have to start, then start there. What's a way to experience the present? Instead of irritation, anger, discomfort, annoyance, how about joy and happiness, and even relief that the crap from the past isn't happening right this minute,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And so what's another way to look at the future, look into the future? With anticipation and excitement.
Yeah.
So that's the other side of the track. One side is blame, resentment, guilt, anger, irritation, annoyance, anxiety, fear, dread. Or look at the past with gratitude, appreciation, experience the present with joy, happiness, relief, pleasure, and the future with anticipation and excitement. So if you're grooving in the past, on the past, all these things that shouldn't have happened, but they happened, and oh my God, what if they happen again? Dispenza says you are creating neurochemicals attuned to those events. And your entire being is set up for those events. So you have to cut that right now. You have to stop. And it's a very difficult thing to do. It's very difficult to lose all of that. Because now what do? Oh my God, who am I? Where am I? What am I going to say? What am I going to think? Who am I going to be? And that is very frightening. And the other thing is, our past self and the events that have happened to us because of our past self, amazingly, we have been conditioned by the people around us. Those parents that we had, they had their own, their own, way of completely pulling a negative past into our lives. So humanity is very easily conditioned for the negative, very, very easily. And it's extremely difficult to quit all that and start reconditioning in a whole different way. And he says you cannot fix anything in the present. You literally have to go into the future, fix it there. And he calls this entering the quantum field. And it's a very difficult concept to grasp in the beginning, but the more you listen to him, the more you get used to this kind of thinking. But there are patterns, even disease patterns, in the quantum field that are stuck. And those have to be loosened up. And when you know how to enter the future, which he teaches you to do in meditations. Those meditations are free. They're online. You can listen to them on YouTube and try them. Then you start thinking of yourself and your life in an entirely different way. And it's very freeing. It's very interesting. And I'm going to predict this, that everyone who does it is going to develop their own way of doing this. And sharing those ways with friends is extremely interesting. So definitely start this and turn your friends onto it and start talking about what you're figuring out about how to change things.
Yes. I love that. I love that idea. And I like that, you know, there are these very many ways to do it, but I think they all rely on the same principles that you are, you know, keep pointing out or drawing towards. And one of them is this imagining, and definitely it's imagining that in the future or accessing the future, which is going to come back and then affect you now too. And comparing those, like you're saying, with other people, I think can be really powerful, because I think getting in the habit of doing these things, and I'm just going to respond to the chat really quick. We're talking about Joe Dispenza at the moment. We've been talking about Joe Dispenza's methods of meditation. But the getting in the habit of these things, I think, is really important because of, you know, like you're talking about, this propensity we have to be sort of easily programmed towards a negative, or to let our past sort of dictate our present and therefore our future. Because of that sort of, you know, momentum that we have going, and especially because this seems to be the norm for most people. And so we also are seeing it replicated around us over and over again. And we know that affects us too. I think then it's even more important to choose some method at the very least and start practicing it. You know, and I'm saying this as I kind of like go in and out of my own practices, but in general, I do a pretty good job of daily trying to keep in at least some practices. But I haven't necessarily been in the practice for a while now of doing this, you know, using imagination and trying to harness that to create sort of a self and a future that I like best. And again, like, no one's going to be perfect, but part of that sharing and practicing is going to keep this going. And then, you know, like you're saying, if you're sharing this with other people and getting them to do it, then we're going to start seeing that change around us too. And if this is everyone's habit, I can't imagine, I shouldn't say I can't imagine when we're talking about imagination, but I would like to imagine how the world would then change and reflect that, you know, growing. And I do think it's growing. I think that we hear more and more about this type of stuff. And I think one of the biggest barriers to it, again, is just these people that are kind of like, oh, that's foo-foo, or that's woo-woo, or whatever. This is not really real. And it's like, but it's measurable. I mean, it is real. And we've seen that. And it's hard to force anyone to sort of accept it or believe it. But yeah, I like this idea that you pointed out in the newsletter again too, that abundance is sort of the natural state of things, you know, and this sort of conditioning that we've received to be negative and to sort of get stuck in the past and negativity and bring that into our future is sort of the opposite of nature. And our natural state is that there is infinite and abundance everywhere, and we can access it in so many ways, and we just don't.
I'd like to point out something that I think people have to disabuse themselves of. We tend to think of abundance as luxury, and they're not the same thing.
I agree.
Luxury is not abundance. Luxury is having a very expensive car, or a very plush house, or tons of money, or this kind of thing, right? Abundance just means opportunity after opportunity after opportunity. Abundance is when your car breaks down and your neighbor says to you, don't worry about it, you can borrow mine.
Yes.
Right? And we are so conditioned to thinking in terms of money, piles of money, the abundance of money, because we've been conditioned to believe that money solves our problems. Well, it actually doesn't.
No.
A deadly disease with money, but Joe Dispenza's people have gotten up out of wheelchairs in his 4-day retreats, and they've cured terminal cancer and terrible health problems because their pineal gland has fired its piezoelectric charges after they've been fired up listening to him, okay? And yeah, maybe we need a guru type or a leader to talk us into this kind of state. But one of his bottom lines, and he repeats this over and over, and I think this is very hard for people, is that you have to do all this meditation, all of this imagining. He doesn't use the word imagining.
Right.
He should. But as in my opinion.
Right.
In an elevated state of emotion. You have to, and what I did with that dumb little wire basket thing, I was really jazzed when I thought of what I wanted. I found it very thrilling and exciting that I could actually see in my mind what I wanted. And for a little while I fantasized about making one, like going and buying some black wire and then getting some wire cutters and trying to, and I said, no way, it's not going to look the way I want it to look if I do it. So I've got to come across one. And it was just a what if, okay, fine, I'll keep it in my mind. And I walked on with my day, with my next day and my next day. And literally within 2 or 3 days, I had that little wire basket. So you have to do this in a state of, like a childlike state of it's part expectation and it's part excitement.
Yes.
And that's a very unique condition because we aren't like that normally. So you've got to elevate your emotions. You've got to wire yourself. He says that you've got to go into the future and meditate on this thing or whatever you want to call it. And then you have to feel in the future like you already have it. You have to feel the gratitude for it. And what that does is it creates the neuronal network in your brain that your brain thinks it's there. And once your neurons are configured to believe that it's there, then it is there in reality. And that's the part that most of us are going to have the hardest time coming to grips with.
Right.
Because what we're saying in our Newtonian minds, well, wait a minute, if I think it happened, but it hasn't happened, how is it going to happen? And that's the power of our neurology. Our neurology literally can walk us right into whatever we've designed in it, right?
Right. Yeah, it's amazing. It makes me think of when you were talking about the neurology of it, this recent article I perused that had to do with the multidimensionality of our brain structure, the way the neurons are. It's not this linear thing where a impulse goes from this neuron to this neuron to this neuron. It's there's a bunch of them connecting all at once from all these different places. And the way they described it was it's much like if you could imagine multiple dimensions and sort of information going into all of these dimensions at once. And so it's our brain is this interdimensional portal for information or something. And that's exactly what we're describing really when we're talking about this. So it's fascinating that a lot of the times it's materialist science actually sort of parallels these things that otherwise seem like they're sort of possibly woo-woo or whatever, but they're not. They're very real. And that key concept that you brought up of the emotion going into it, I think this is, if we wanted to talk about magic, which I don't think we necessarily do, but if we did, that's a key component in magic as well. And I think this might almost seem like magic to people, but that feeling of joy and or whatever it is that you'd feel like you're saying and placing that here, it sort of anchors it almost or something, gives it maybe some substance to work with. But I think that that's really a key component. And I went back to babies again in my mind and thinking of my little nephew. We'll be sitting somewhere in the house and all of a sudden he'll be like, oh, a boat, and he'll run to the window, and that joy and expectation in his mind, this boat is going to be there and it's so real. And he gets there and it's not always there. There is often a boat there because he can see the water, but even when there's not, he's not disappointed. And part of me is You know, this is like a baby thing that maybe we could go back to, because there is going to be a boat. It's just maybe not that moment, that time. Like, we don't necessarily get to dictate like how and when. We just know that we can make it happen, right? But I just love that energy he brings to it. Like,
well, wait a minute. Maybe he is sensing a boat that has changed direction or was planning to be there or something, or will be there, because he may be picking up on something that you, being much older, are not able to pick up on.
True. I've
Now,
like blocked it out somehow or whatever. Yeah.
You're not the same kind of receiver that he is.
I've been trained out of it.
I'm going to ask you a question.
Okay.
Do you ever get goosebumps or tingly feeling about when something happens? And tell me about that. What is that?
Oh, yes. I mean, in all kinds of ways, I have, had whatever you want to call it, foresight or foreknowledge, or not even necessarily so like sometimes like at the same time or whatever, but of things that you're otherwise not capable of knowing, like sort of psychic. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, in a sense. I'm actually asking you about the physical experience of getting goosebumps or tingly when something weird or very cool or whatever happens.
I might be a weirdo. I don't really get goosebumps unless I'm cold, but I do get the chill. I get the like, ooh, that chill that goes down your spine. And I think that's what, for the same situations, is what you're getting at.
When do you get that? When?
It seems like I get it when something is sort of like profoundly settling into my mind as real, even though it's like not supposed to be.
All right. So what Dispenza says is that is a very specific, very powerful, new, different neurochemical signal.
Huh.
It's very different from the normal set of neurochemical signals that you have.
Interesting.
So it's confirming something, it's responding to something, and it's a unique type of signaling, right? I'm throwing my own interpretation onto it because I just heard him say this once. It's a new neurochemical signal. If your hair stands on end, you get this tingly sensation, you might get goosebumps. So this is an electromagnetic kind of a biophysical signal. It's very powerful. And it's, as you say, it happens when a dawning, something that's bigger than the out of the normal thinking path comes to you and settles in, right?
Yeah.
And we think, some people say it's confirmation from the other side. It's something from another dimension. There's a poke that you're getting. There's a hello, a woohoo that you're getting from another dimension. It's beyond the ordinary. And I think everybody has experienced something like that.
Yeah.
And so the question is, do you want to communicate with yourself on that level? Do you want to receive on that level? And maybe that's what your little nephew is getting. He's getting reception that you're not getting, right?
Yeah.
Now, another thing Dispenza says that I think is very, very powerful. He says, the amplitude of a new decision can override the programming of the past. So your past and all the stuff you drag into your everyday, your routine, that is all programming. Your anxieties, your fears, it's all coming from programming. And if you don't like that programming, all you have to do is create something new, decide in favor of something new. And he uses this word amplitude, which I wrote down because I thought it was an interesting word. In a waveform, amplitude is like the height of the wave, how big it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
The amplitude of your new decision, the size of it, can override, and I'm not sure if he said overwrite or override, but they're very similar. all that past programming. So if you make a teeny weeny wimpy little decision like, oh yeah, well, one of these days I'll get around to such and such, you're not going to overwrite or override anything from the past, right?
Right.
If you make a big new decision, I am doing this now. And if you invest yourself in that, and now this is easy and it's free. If you dive into that decision with elation, with elevated state, with elevated and positive emotions, with gratitude that thank God I finally made up my mind. If you dive into that decision with your being, your excitement, and you fill it up, you create amplitude in that decision. And now you've given yourself what it takes to overwrite the past. That's where you start.
I love that. It's making me think of this thing where people have this experience. I've never had it, but where it's like they're in a situation and suddenly and it all happens like in a split second, but suddenly they're like forced to sort of commit fully to this series of actions that makes no rational sense and that likely will end in their death, but they do it in order to save another person. And it's like the way they describe it is that all of a sudden the realization hits them that if they don't act right now and with full commitment, it won't work and they'll both die, or at least that person will die. So one example is this guy standing on like a subway platform and all of a sudden, someone falls in and the train is coming, like it's already visible. So it's like seconds away or whatever. And he just dives and no one else, everyone watching when they're interviewed later, like there's no reason he should have driven, like it was too fast, like the person falls and he dives right away. And that's not like how life works, but in his mind, it's like something told him like, you can save him, but you go right now. And so he just went for it and, covers this guy up. Cause I think the guy was like seizing or something, but he like held him down and the train went over both of them and they both survived. But that guy would have died if he didn't. And if he would have waited at all or like hesitated or not had just this full like amplitude of his decision, then it wouldn't have worked out. It's slightly different, but I feel like that level of like, full commitment and just like no fear and no doubt is sort of similar to what you're describing.
Yeah, it's very interesting that what you said, he had to act instantaneously. And maybe that's how we change our lives, is that we just do something instantaneous like that. But it has to be done whole hog.
Yes.
And any new decision you make has to be done whole hog. You cannot go into it in a wimpy way and do it half-heartedly, because it's never going to be able to overwrite that past that you're carrying if you just do it with a little bit of, wattage.
Yeah. Well, if you're sort of hesitating, that's that fear, and if you're acting in fear, then how can it? And you talk in your newsletter about, fear is sort of this like opposite of imagination, or it's not even really opposite. It is imagination. Like you say, it's just imagination applied to like the worst possible outcomes. You're fearing this, you're like putting this imaginative energy into that. But, if you're not really committed, then it must mean that you doubt in some way, that you fear in some way. And so that's not going to get you the best results.
Yeah, I said in the newsletter that fear and worry and doubt are your imagination being used against you by you.
Yeah.
You're imagining bad outcomes that haven't even happened yet. So now you're employing your own imagination against yourself. And I talked about the climber, Alex Honnold. We haven't gotten into that. But he is the top free solo rock climber. Did I say it right?
Free climbing, I think.
No, I put my newsletter away already, but he climbs without any aids of any kind. No pegs, no hooks, nothing.
Yes.
And he goes over it in his mind. He'll sit in his van for days and he'll just go over the climb. And these are climbs that are, they take hours, and there are many, 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 many finger holds, hand holds, foot holds. He practices the climb with the ropes, with the pegs first, and then sections of the climb without, anything, and then he stitches the whole thing together in his mind and rehearses it in his mind day after day after day. So this shows you the power of the mind. And then once he's doing it, he's got to do it with his full free spirit. He cannot doubt, because he says fear and doubt will ruin the experience. This is what's amazing. Fear and doubt will ruin your experience of anything.
Yes.
You can go to a fantastic vacation, and if you drag fears and doubts with you about other stuff that you're supposed to leave behind at home, you're going to ruin the experience of your vacation, guaranteed, right?
Yeah, right.
So fear and doubt ruin your experience. And I think this is a good exercise for people. If you tend to be a worrywart, as many people are, or something is riding on you heavily and you're worried about it, and you might have very good reason to be worried about it, just try to take bits of the day, do something, and don't think about that stuff.
Yeah.
Just to not ruin the experience of what you're doing as you're doing it. And I think that will grow on us, don't you?
Absolutely. Yeah. And getting rid of the fear and the doubt, like you said, it's not like it's something you can just do. But if you can, like you said, just take little pieces of the day and just try and, for that time, like not do it. And it is like we've been kind of coming back to, it's like building this habit of being less afraid. And it's kind of like, I have people say to me sometimes, like, you're so brave, for various things. People think I'm brave. And I'm always like, oh, am I? I don't think that I am. I think that I don't have a habit of fear. And I guess I'm really lucky for that. I have a habit of making decisions and committing to them fully. And so I'm like, sure, like something bad could happen at any time, anywhere, but why, like, thinking about that is never going to help me accomplish anything. So, I just go forward anyway. And I think that seems like bravery to some people. And sometimes I have fear, and I guess bravery to me then would be like moving forward despite that, or trying to get through it to the point where you're not letting it plague you. But I also wanted to touch back on that idea of that Alex, this free climber, uses of going over the visualization in his mind, because we have this data that suggests that when people visualize themselves doing something, it has the same effect as them actually practicing it in real life. So if you, like, him visualizing that is the same as him actually going out and physically climbing and practicing those things, in the way that it gets you, more fluent and more capable of doing that in like just a moment's notice, and just like practicing something would. So it's kind of fascinating that, science is backing this up as a legitimate practice, and that anybody can do. At any time you can imagine yourself doing anything. So even if you didn't really believe that you can manifest the future in the way that you want, as we've been talking about, you can at least believe that you visualizing this is getting you ready to then carry it out at some point, at least, right? So it's at least like the lowest kind of level that maybe like anyone can get into.
That's how I learned to dive. I'm not any kind of Olympic diver by any remote means, but when I was a child, I was afraid of diving. I didn't jump headfirst into a swimming pool. So I was kind of ashamed that I was afraid of it. And I remember lying in bed at night and seeing myself on the edge of the pool, and then bending over, tilting myself forward, and then following my arms into the water. And I did this for 1 or 2 nights, and then I went to the pool and I did it. And it was easy. I went right into the water right the way I imagined, exactly the same way. And there was no belly flopping or anything like that. It was just so smooth, I could not believe it. And for a few years, diving off diving boards became my favorite thing at a swimming pool. I was just constantly diving off the board, going back, diving off. And I see kids doing this now. The pool I go to has a very high diving board, and I see these kids standing there and they're trembling with fear. And everybody's yelling at them, just go, go, go. And then finally, some of them won't go off. They'll just back down and climb back, off it. Some of them will drop like a little projectile into the water. And I know right there, they just broke a barrier.
Yeah.
So you can break those barriers in your mind. You really can. And that's the first place to start.
I love that vision of that, like that being this barrier that's broken, because I use that too in my descriptions of when people are trying to like ask me like, how did you get brave or how did you do these things? I'm like, I just got really good at jumping. And that's my sort of analogy of like, nobody, I shouldn't say nobody, most people feel fear and nervousness or trepidation at some level about jumping off something, right? But at some point you get to where you just do it anyway. Like you just go and you just trust that this is something that you can do, and then you overcome it in that way, and you break this barrier. And it's the same with diving boards as it is with anything else in life, right? You can practice it in your mind, you can visualize it going successfully, and in the end you're still gonna have to like make that commitment that we're talking about, with that commitment with the hopefully most amount of amplitude that you can muster to apply to it so that it'll go the best that it can. And you talked about in the newsletter, eliminating doubt and replacing it with mastery. And you asked, does this bring you into this sort of sixth sense? And I loved that concept, and I wondered if you want to elaborate on that.
Well, these climbers, they're using a sixth sense.
Yeah.
Because especially when they're on a surface that isn't rock, it's a crumbly surface, and they know that whatever they hold on to could break off the cliff right then and there. But they know where to put their hand, where not to put their hand, and something is guiding them. And I think that that's the other dimension coming through. At the time I wrote this newsletter, I really wasn't thinking in terms of other dimensions. But now that I went into the Dispenza material more, that newsletter was good 6-7 months ago.
Yeah.
I feel that we are doing what he says. You're going into the future. And when you go into the future in your mind, this is very hard to believe, but you're actually carving new neuronal pathways. You're getting your neurology used to this thing that you're imagining, that you're dreaming up.
Yeah.
And once you do that with your body, once you hardwire your body for that, like these climbers, for instance, the one we talked about, Alex Honnold, who sits in his van and goes over the climb for hours and hours, and literally he is there, he's doing it. His neurons are creating all of the circuitry to do that climb perfectly, and he's practicing it even though it's raining out. He can't do the climb, he can't practice another time. And there are times when you can't go and exercise your muscles, because then you'll be tired for the real event. So the best place to do it is in your mind.
Yes.
To get that last workout, that last stage of practice in. So our minds are good for a lot more than what we use them for.
Yeah.
They're not just good for problem solving. They're good for creating.
Yes. Absolutely. And you can only create from that space of, imagination and, the emotion that goes into it. And there was also this piece that you just made me think of when you were talking about creation, that, and I don't know I think it was in that first part where you were quoting from Rappaport, but that consciousness creates more consciousness, that consciousness can create consciousness. And it sort of like sent me through this loop. I was like, is that what consciousness is for in the end, is to create more consciousness? And if so, we're conscious beings, but like this, what we're describing, I would say, is sort of like the epitome of being fully conscious, is knowing that you're conscious, knowing that your consciousness creates, and then applying that consciousness in the creative act, like to create the future and more consciousness. So I don't know if I'm thinking of all of that right, but that's how it's
right or wrong. But I think he was saying that consciousness keeps reinventing itself.
okay.
It's almost like the what if principle of imagination. What if keeps creating more what if. And it keeps opening up new paths and new horizons. And so whether you call it consciousness, whether you call it what if, whether you call it creativity, we're capable of inventing all the time.
Yeah.
And we don't do that as much as we could and we should, and we'd have a lot more fun. We would enjoy a lot more if we invented, even if it's in our mind.
Yes.
So if people want to get my newsletter, they can subscribe, but it is a paid subscription. I just want to say that you can't sign up. Many people, after they listen to a show, they will email me. So on sofiasmallstorm.com, there is a newsletter tab, and there are some older issues there. I really haven't put new issues up in a long time, but I should. And every time I think about it, I forget promptly the next day. So anyway, that's how you would do it. You would sign up by following those instructions. You just have to send a donation in by mail.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people would like to get hooked up with that. And is there anywhere else where they can go that you want to direct people to access anything else from you? I know that Avatar.
Avatarproducts.com is my online store, and that's where I share things that I've discovered that are for health and well-being. These are not expensive products, and they're things that I've either created or friends of mine have created. I work with a couple of chemists and have come up with forms of magnesium that, a gel form that I kind of suggested to the chemist, and magnesium deodorant, these ways of using elemental, inexpensive earth minerals that really benefit you. And I feel that if we just do iodine, magnesium, and a couple of things for gut health, tilt your bed, and reduce EMFs. I have cell phone cases that I have created there on the website, and they're all custom made. So these things can help you in ways that are, most people would not imagine how helpful these things are. And they're simple. So that's avatarproducts.com. And the sales of those products kind of keep me going, so that it really helps.
And they're excellent products from what I've seen, and I've bought a few items there myself and been very happy. And I know you put a lot of research and time into what you're presenting there, and that none of it's not there just to be there. It's there because you know that it's quality and that it will help people. And I appreciate that about shopping there. It's a cool experience. So thank you for that.
It's stuff that I use myself. And honestly, some people send me things all the time or try to get me to carry products, and if I can't relate to it, I can't really sell it.
Yeah.
I apologize to the creators of certain products, but I just haven't been able to sell them because they taste weird or they just don't do what I think they're going to do for me. Anyway, so it's really my personal selections.
And I think that's part of what is powerful and effective about that way of doing things. Is this is one spot out of a lot online that people can go, but when you're doing something that comes fully from yourself and what you've known and what you've understood to be helpful and beneficial, and you're sharing out of that spirit of like, look, here's what I have found and what works for me, like that, I just think it's something that people can kind of relate to and trust more, and I really like it. And so it's obviously not like this exhaustive, you're there to cure every single person's every single problem. It's just something that people can trust and relate to, and I think that's part of what's good about it. So I appreciate it very much. And if there's nothing else that you want to direct people towards for yourself besides Avatar products and your blog to sign up for the newsletter and whatnot, is there anything else that you want to leave people with as a sort of final thought for them to reflect on as they're leaving tonight?
Just know that grooving on the past, especially if it's negative, is going to color your future. I really now understand why it does that. I never understood this before, and it's time that we stop doing that and we start a whole new kind of creation of self which is very, very possible. I never could appreciate how possible this is until really the last 2 or 3 months. It's mind-blowing. So I want everyone to know that if I have come to believe this, it's got to be the case, because I am a hard sell.
Yes. That's the other thing I always appreciate about you is you fully kind of investigate things. You don't just take it and run with it. It's, you're a skeptic at heart, I think.
Oh, yeah. Terrible skeptic.
Which is not a bad thing. I think people think skeptic means negative, but it just means that you're going to ask questions until you're satisfied that this is most likely true, right?
Yeah. If it works, and it works repeatedly, and it not just works for me, but for other people, then it's what it is. It has to be.
Yes.
It's
I love it.
It has to be. That's what I meant to say.
That's true gnosis, right? You've experienced it and come to know it for yourself, and that's how you know it's true.
Right.
Well, yes, thank you very much. And fellow travelers of the path, it is a beautiful thing. And this has been your analog, electric, concentric dose of wisdom, according to Sofia Smallstorm. Sophia, it is so fantastic to talk to you again. I'm really glad we got to catch up, and thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you. I loved this show. It was great fun.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so glad. And it'll be there for anyone to see from now on as well. And all that we have ever heard, seen, smelled, tasted, or felt is all that informs us of what to expect from the future. And yet, we've never been to the future. How could we know what it holds and how it will be experienced? We can't. And the silliest thing that we could do once we understand the power of our imagination is to get stuck on how it was or how it has been so far. The best and most powerful thing we can do is start imagine what could be, and there is no reason not to. At worst, if all we've said could somehow be pure rubbish, you'd at least have had a fun time engaging that long-lost tool that most of us left way back in childhood, before it was forcibly pushed from our minds, and that's your imagination. And until you remember what you came here for and begin to make it your reality, travel well, aim for balance, and always look inside first. Mwah. Good night.
It's a one-on-one lesson, so do your homework. Make your dome hurt while up on earth. My bones are blessed from holy dirt. Vibes manifested to words that told me search for verbs and adjectives to describe birth. Worth more than one can speak. While the tongue beats a weak, a sour taste in your mouth, bittersweet. Words can also kill you when you sleep. Mind condition, low frequencies while the subconscious mind listens. I can television filled with lies, disguised as truth, and spread it like the word to the youth. Watch the tube. A place where the God gets food is sorcery. To recreate the God forgery does more than meets the eye. Not too many know. Just hear me flow like the eye of Horus Henio. Yeah, not ready to leave until we believe we're free to go. You hear me? Run.
Sculpted from the ether, the material will eat ya. Stuck on this plane, lanes use jet fuel to greet ya. The dimensional three ain't meeting me on top of the fourth. Didn't climb Jacob's ladder to squab with a sword. Forged with Yggdrasil, branched down. Try quiet your lamps now. Ascension past the matter that they slam out they damn mouths. We ain't on land now, but they over understand. Sacrificing wisdom, hoarding dumber, kosher, wicked hands. Putting faith in worthless worship of the mortals. Artificial portals, mass ingestion of the black goo. Bioengineered morsels, conversing with machine elves. Bypassing maggots, they stuck on Android screens now. I'm scrolling emerald tablets. Moloch living lavish, off the backs of the savage. Them clasped hands at the Sabbath. Smack of energy damage, they done twisted the tongues. But nanotech in the lungs, the awakening's begun. All they really can do is fucking
run.